Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, September 10th, 2025, and our friend Alastair Crooke is back with us. Welcome back, Alastair.
Thank you very much, Nima. Always a pleasure to be here.
Please subscribe to Alastair Crooke's Substack, and it's below his name, and it's conflictsforum.substack.com. And you can find a lot of stuff there. And he writes about what's going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and geopolitical issues generally. And before getting started, please subscribe and hit the like button in order to help us to reach more people. Alistair, what's going on in the Middle East? I think it's of huge importance right now because Israel attacked Qatar. Qatar is not Lebanon, Syria. It's one of the most important allies of the United States in the Middle East. And the policy they're pursuing in Qatar is somehow the same policy they have been pursuing in Iran, in Yemen, Syria. They tried to kill the we cannot call him the president of Syria, but the guy who's running Syria right now. How do you see the way that Israeli government is behaving? It seems that the attack was totally failed. And here is what the Israeli ambassador to the United States said on Fox News.
Terrorists are on notice. They are going to be eliminated.
Mr. Ambassador, understand that and the history. Obviously, Israel is under attack constantly. In this case, Qatar officials and Hamas leadership is saying that you did not get the targets you were seeking. They are obviously condemning this attack as attacking inside an allied country to the U.S. The U.S. here at the White House expressing concern that it did not advance the goals of the U.S. or Israel. And you have the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, with very pointed statements in condemnation. So did you get the targets you were seeking?
If we didn't get them this time, we'll get them the next time. Israel under Prime Minister Netanyahu is changing the face of the Middle East. We have degraded Hezbollah, we've degraded Hamas, the Houthis, and Iran, the head of the snake that's leading these proxies in an effort to destroy Israel. When we defeat these proxies of Iran, when we defeat Islamic extremism, and actually that will benefit our neighbors in the region who are moderate and want to live in a state of peace with us. So right now we may be subject to a little bit of criticism. They'll get over it. And Israel is being changed for the better. The region is being changed for the better as we remove these enemies of peace and these enemies of Western civilization from their ability to implement terrorism.
There are rumors that the Turkish intelligence somehow informed the Hamas leaders and before the attack happening because they were witnessing what's going on with the case of Israel, the movement in Israel. Your take on that, Alastair. Go ahead.
Well, of course, I don't know that. I mean, I don't know what intelligence services passed or didn't pass to Hamas or to Qatar. But I would say that it's quite possible because, of course, any aircraft that is up in the air, particularly when you have sort of British tanker aircraft and you have also then American tanker aircraft for refueling airplanes, and you have Israeli F-15s aircraft in the same area of Doha. I'm sure that will have been picked up and will have rung warning bells somewhere in the region, and it's quite possible that that was passed on. I don't know. But what you said at the outset is really the crux of it, and it's most important. I mean, this marks a huge change because, as you rightly said, Qatar has been at the heart of presenting itself as the sort of regional mediator. Going back, if you recall, it was even the Taliban went to Doha for mediation. But also, Doha has been supporting the forces against Syria earnestly, training them and preparing them and giving them, if you like, support. And it has also been involved very much in also Lebanon against Hezbollah. All of this was under the rubric of, if you like, removing Iran from the region. And to this end, Qatar has also been effectively a facilitator in one way or another of Mossad. So it's been playing a game with everyone, if you like, and up until now, you know, it has succeeded as a sort of golden boy of mediation that it is there. And of course, most of this mediation, including the movement of Hamas to Doha, was an American suggestion, was an American proposal. I know that because I heard that from Assad himself, who said that when Paul came and told him to cut the links with Hamas and with Iran, Assad was told, you have to do that, otherwise, you know, we'll send you back to the Stone Age. That was when Paul was Secretary of State at the time before the Iraq War. And he said, well, what's going to happen then to Hamas? You want me to send them to their deaths? Is that right? To the Israelis to kill them? And Paul said, no, don't you worry. It's all taken care of. They're going to Doha. It's fixed. So clearly that was part of the arrangement, if you like, from that time. So they've been playing this, if you like, this game, profiting from it enormously, both in terms of their standing in America and in Europe, and profiting more directly from it with direct links with some of Trump's family and supporters. So yes, and then suddenly this all comes to an end. And it is the end of a era. There's no doubt of it. You know, they thought, perhaps not unreasonably, that they were immune. They were doing this mediation role for the US and for Europe, and they were working to this end. And then suddenly, boom, bombs, a lot of them, go off in Doha with the aim of killing the Hamas negotiating team that was there specifically to discuss the latest proposal that ostensibly came from Witkoff via Qatar and other intermediaries, proposing a new form of words or a new formula for ending the Gaza conflict. And instead of which, you know, they were not killed. And my understanding is that there were several people who were killed, but they weren't the negotiating team, or at least most of the negotiating team. We don't have exact details at the moment. So it's obviously had a huge impact because, I mean, until now, Gulf states and Saudi Arabia have all relied on the fact that, you know, they host American bases, they act on behalf of the United States, they buy weapons, they give money to the US, they support it in every way like a sort of a good protege of the US, and then suddenly Israel comes in and spoils that whole game. What's its longer term implications? It's not clear, but that's one important conclusion. The second one you hinted at, which is also important, there are no rules, there are no limitations, there are no constraints now on Israel. It goes where it wants, it ignores boundaries, it ignores frontiers, it just goes where it wants, it uses force where it wants, it will decapitate where it can, and that there is nothing that is stopping it, and certainly nothing from Washington that is stopping it on this progress. So yes, it's a new era. We have unlimited war in the Middle East that is now established. They will go anywhere, attack anywhere in order to further Israeli interests. and it comes at the expense of a Gulf state who sort of made its reputation, made its living, and to a certain extent, in this way. And many of them are going to have to recalibrate. You know, it was all right for Gulf states. They were happy enough to sort of just simply say, well, you know, we're cooperating with the United States to contain Iran and all of the proxies of Iran. But now it seems that they are not invulnerable. Now it seems that things could be extended. And obviously they are very and will be very shaken by it. How is it going to affect geopolitics? It's too early to say. I don't think there's any prospects of those Gulf states making a big switch or changing. But I do think it's going to affect how they consider and how they approach, you know, what is coming, which is the likely conflict with Iran, and how they deal with that, and whether they're prepared to be as helpful towards the United States as they were on previous occasions, allowing their airspace to be used and allowing airfields to be used, when the reward for this might be you know, a series of bombs attacking something. I don't mean the Saudi leadership or Qatari leadership, but undoubtedly destabilizing these states, particularly within their own population. I think this is where it will make them frightened, because it pulls away, if you like, the mask about how, you know, all of this was done because, you know, this is how you got American support and American protection. And now that mask has been pulled away. And so what will be the internal ramifications in places like Saudi Arabia? How will people react to that? I mean, I'm talking about at the street level, not at the upper level, but at the street level. I think already there is tensions and unhappiness at what's happening in Gaza and the Palestinians. And this will be just another, you know, another episode of it, I think. So I think that's as far as one can go at this stage about sort of seeing where it'll all lead.
I think we can argue that Israel is in some sort of direct conflict with Turkey in Syria. And because they're hitting the targets in Syria that are related somehow, cooperating on the equipment, and I don't know, the people who are somehow cooperating with the Turkish government in Syria. How do you see the escalation in Syria? And what is the outcome of what has happened to the government in Lebanon? Because anybody in Lebanon could argue. So what is the security guarantee from the United States for us?
Well, I wouldn't trust whatever guarantees you think you have at all. I would say they're very untrustworthy, and you want to watch your back. But in terms of what you were talking about in Syria, I would say that what we see that Erdogan has been very much presenting Syria, the parts of Syria that were Ottoman, as still part of the Ottoman Velayat of Ottoman lineage. I mean, from Mosul to Aleppo, all of that is claimed by Turkey to have been unfairly taken from it at the end of the Second World War, and it's rightly part of their territory. Now, this is, I mean, how far do we take this seriously? I think we have to realize that Erdogan is in campaigning mode at the moment, because his presidency will expire at the end of this term of office, unless he can persuade Parliament that there is an emergency, in which case then, exceptionally, it's possible to extend that term in office. But also because there is quite a shift taking place in Turkey, and particularly in the urban areas. You see protests. The young people are no longer, if you like, sort of the pious Sunnis that you would find in other parts of Turkey that were sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood and sympathetic to Erdogan. It's shifting. And so there's a lot of arrests taking place as he tries to keep control. And there's a lot of unhappiness about what's happened in Gaza and to the Palestinians in Turkey at the street level. And it's not working. The old formulas that Erdogan had were not working. So to a certain extent, Syria is an important diversion from the problems that he's facing at home. It's an important diversion and a way of sort of showing Turkish nationalism in a way that isn't so offensive, if you like, to some of the young inhabitants of Istanbul and others that have been slipping away from his grip and slipping away actually from the whole Islamic formula that he's produced, the predominantly Muslim Brotherhood type of Islam that he has embraced, to a slightly different type of Islam, more in tune, if you like, with the sort of regional sense of national liberation, anti-colonialism, and these elements, which don't, I feel like, fit very well with the Muslim Brotherhood, more rigid view of Sunni Islam. So I think he wants to make a show. The more territory to be tough and taking territory in Syria will generate headlines, good headlines, sort of, dealing with the Kurds will cause complications, of course, in Turkey too, but, this is all good stuff for Erdogan to show that he's taking back historic parts of Turkey. Israel, by contrast, is absolutely determined not to let Turkey dominate in Syria, not to let it militarily dominate, not to let it establish with the Druze an autonomy in one part and with the Kurds in the northeast, and to create a sort of corridor for Turkey going from Al-Tanaf right through Sweda up towards the Iranian border, which of course NATO would like to see happening. Israel is intent on doing that, but Turkey equally doesn't want it. But Israel is getting further and further and almost encircling Damascus. The leader in Damascus barely can leave the presidential palace. His writ doesn't go much further than that. Yes, there are gangs that say they're in accord with him, aligned with him, but he does not really have control over those people. They act on their own interests, and often their interests are about stealing money and stealing possessions, as well as settling scores with Alawites and with Shia and with Christians, etc.
And the case of Lebanon, while they're trying to put a lot of pressure on Hezbollah and coming with the attack on Qatar, I don't see any sort of positive sign being sent to Lebanon.
I think there is a little bit more positive sign. Yes, there's huge pressure from the Americans and from Saudi Arabia particularly. Again, going back to what you asked me to begin with, acting on behalf of the Americans to help facilitate the disarming of Hezbollah. Of course, the Saudis don't like Hezbollah anyway, but they're acting therefore with the Americans. It looks, and it's very tentative at the moment, but it looks like the Lebanese army, and don't forget that much of the Lebanese army, which is a conscript army, necessarily is Shi'i. The army is not a Sunni army, it is very mixed. But the head of the army seems to be drawing back from having a conflict with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah have made it very clear that they will not accept disarmament at any price. And he does not want to see the spilling of Lebanese blood on behalf of external actors. So I think, in a sense, the army is, the Lebanese army I'm talking about, is pulling back from it. And really, even the president, too, is showing signs of not being so enthusiastic for this process. Leaving only Nawaf Salim, the prime minister, who's an ardent supporter, come what may, of disarming Hezbollah. Hezbollah, of course, still have their main weapons. I mean, the heavy missiles, they haven't been removed from them. And they've been reforming themselves and reconstructing as a military force during this time, keeping very quiet, going off the radar screens altogether, not using telephones or walkie-talkies or pagers or anything like that. They have gone absolutely dark in terms of their communications. So the general assumption is that they're therefore in a defensive, rather vulnerable position. But I would put a question mark on that. I don't think that Hezbollah is necessarily at all in that. I think they have been preparing, reconstructing themselves, rearming themselves, and preparing against the possibility of a conflict, which it would always be possible if, for example, there is a further round of military action against Iran. It would be quite possible that then either they would be brought in. I remember years ago being told that the base calculations of the United States was before attacking Iran, they had to attack Lebanon and Hezbollah. That because they needed to be destroyed before attacking Iran. So I think that Hezbollah is looking at that and thinking about that quite carefully. But at the moment, it's very tentative. And I'm not suggesting it's over at all, but I'm just saying there is some signs that even the Americans don't want to go into a civil war in Lebanon. And I don't think, they're looking at the mess that is in Syria. And I don't think they see the idea that, the so-called forces of Jilani and Nusra are really capable of going in, even with the support of Tripoli in the north of Lebanon, to disarm or attack Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a formidable fighting force, and what's really happened in the wake of this is that, yes, there was a big blow when they lost the leadership. But now it's in the hands of sort of 40-year-olds, 35 to 40-year-old Hezbollahi. And they are, I met many of them when they were younger in 2006, when I was in the South during the war of 2006. They're hugely impressive military commanders. They were very young then, 21, something like that, but very competent, very well trained, and very full of, energy, very controlled energy, disciplined, controlled energy. So now they're in their 40s, and now they will be more mature, and they will be in command. I don't think you should sort of fall into the, I'm not talking about you, but others fall into the rather lazy assumption that Hezbollah is sort of licking its wounds and is feeling defeated. I think that is correct, and we may see the proof of it in the next period, and then we will be able to see whether or not that is right.
We had Iranian foreign minister in Cairo signing an agreement with IAEA, with Grossi, the head of IAEA. Many people are criticizing Iran because of this. And what is going on in the mind of Iranians, in your opinion?
I thought you'd ask about that. I don't have a very clear answer. The optics are clearly pretty disastrous. I mean, you know, to see the foreign minister shaking hands with Grossi, the Secretary General of IAEA, whom they have accused of effectively providing the information necessary for the 13th of June attack on the nuclear scientists to Israel, as long as together with other information gathered through their AI structures in IAEA. I think that the background to this, in a sense, is what you saw happen in Jianging with the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization there, and the meeting there chaired by Xi and Mr. Putin and Modi. And one of the main results out of that meeting was a very strong tripartite statement that came out, signed by the three foreign ministers, saying that any snapback of sanctions on Iran are procedurally flawed and illegal and cannot proceed. And I mean, this is tough language in a formal statement to the Secretary General. It's not clear that's enough to stop it happening, the snapback, because the E3, the European three, Germany, France, and Britain, who are still in the JCPOA, when they initiated the process for snapback, they did it, I think, on the 28th of August. And they have 30 days before it takes effect. Unless there's a change, it will automatically come into effect after 30 days. Why then the great rush to do it at that time? Because on the 1st of October, Russia becomes president of the Security Council. And that doesn't mean there's a veto on it. There isn't, can't be a veto, but it does mean that Russia and China can perhaps act procedurally, not in terms of veto, but procedurally, to delay or even disrupt that process. But it's by no means certain. I think the prospects at the moment are that snapback, we've yet to see what is the E3 reaction to the negotiations between Iran and the IAEA. And we've yet to see exactly what it entails. Of course, you know, it's being spun in the West that, you know, that the IAEA is now going to go to Fordo in Isfahan and everywhere and poke around there and have a look at the enriched uranium and that reinstitute the sort of inspection mechanisms. But I think that is unlikely because Parliament has already passed an act which controls very closely. In fact, I think there was a lot of criticism in Parliament that there should be any further dealings with the IAEA. So in one sense, you can say that what happened, what has happened with the agreement to talk with the IAEA, and indeed then to sign some form of a agreement, which may be very general, may have very little beyond what the Parliament outlined for it. In order to preserve, if you like, the support, the continued support of Russia, China, and the SCO states against action in the Security Council. I think the Russia and China would prefer that the first moves come from the West rather than from Iran, if you like, rather than, say, Iran refusing to negotiate with the IAEA and saying no. Then it looks or would be presented by the West as Iran being on the wrong side of this issue, and that would weaken their efforts to, if you like, change the process. But I have to say, it's unfortunate it's come at the same time that we've seen this attack in Doha on the Hamas leadership, to see the Foreign Minister Arashi sort of sitting and signing with the very people that the Parliament has said we don't want them back in the country again. It seems like sort of to be waving the white flag. However, I think you've got to see it against the broader context of what is the geopolitical process and the support that Iran requires from the SCO members. As I say, at the end of the day, we don't know, but my guess was that this will go ahead. Incidentally, and I've written about it, and you can find it on that Substack that Nima just mentioned earlier. But when he first was inaugurated, Trump wrote this presidential, what was it called? Memorandum, a national presidential memorandum, which implies that it is legally binding on the entire administration, legally mandatory. And it included all the usual things: no nuclear weapon, no missiles, the end to the proxies, what he calls the proxies of Iran around the region. But it also instructs the Secretary of State to ensure that snapback is initiated and that Iran is made to bear the full consequences of its, if you like, abuse of the JCPOA, if it's failure to comply with the JCPOA. So it's been there from the beginning. And if you read the memorandum, it's like if you like, a blueprint for war. I mean, there's no sort of concessions. And so I think this is one of the difficulties Iran is facing, one of the problems, because in the light of what's just happened, in the light of what we've seen across the region, for those who are talking about diplomacy and negotiation with the United States, I mean, it seems a chimera, because it's quite clear the United States, and if you read that memorandum, you'll see, I mean, it's not looking for a negotiated outcome, the United States or Israel. It is looking for capitulation, complete capitulation, and willingness to, if you like, leave itself, Iran, to strip itself naked of any defense systems or any self-defense, or else face military action. So I don't think I don't think that, the signs of that should be, the signs of talking with the IAEA should be interpreted necessarily as Iran is going to, if you like, concede towards the West in any way. But I think it is, if you like, a necessary tactical implementation. But I think there's a very clear understanding in the leadership of Iran that its likely snapback sanctions will be implemented, and therefore quite likely is that Iran will leave the NPT, and therefore we will be in a crisis before very long. And one of the strange things is quite paradoxical is, until the 13th of June, the Israelis' narrative was all the time was saying, this is the opportunity, this is the window. Iran has never been weaker. All its proxies have been disarmed or damaged or been decapitated. This is the window we can go in and we can attack Iran, and we must take advantage of the window. And what happens now? Well, Iran, there was a report by the INSS, I think INSS, which is a sort of security NGO in Israel, saying, well, the 13th of July didn't weaken Iran at all as expected. And then it laments very much, saying, well, actually, there wasn't a sign of any discontent with the government. This is the Israeli document. There wasn't any sign of, and they lament and said, unfortunately, there was no sign of any sort of disquiet against the government in the wake of the 13th of June and the subsequent action against Israel. It didn't happen. And then it comes to the logical conclusion, or illogical, as you may choose it, to say, nonetheless, there must be regime change in Iran, full stop. That was how the non sequitur follows through. No, it didn't work. Is there any reason to think why it should work next time? No. Nonetheless, we continue to do this. So what they're saying now is, paradoxically, actually, Iran is getting stronger and Israel is getting weaker, so the window is smaller and shorter. So it's just the opposite of what we had, a few months ago, that the window was short because, Iran was weaker and Israel is stronger. Now it's changed and it's saying, actually, Israel is weaker and Iran is stronger, so we better get on and do it quickly. So, I mean, that's where things stand on that talk with the IAEA. It's a complex exercise, but I think the key thing is that is understood in Iran, and I think the bottom line is Iran is busily preparing at full speed against the prospect, which they don't want, but will accept if it comes, of war.
Alastair, before going to the conflict in Ukraine, when you look at the Middle East today and the way that the United States, you've mentioned the policy of capitulation, total capitulation they're seeking in the Middle East in terms of dealing with Iran and other players in the Middle East. But with this policy of gamble and chaos that they're pursuing, do you think that the end game for them is somehow to have some sort of leverage in the Middle East? Because I don't see that coming. When you pursue capitulation and you see your competitors like China and Russia, they don't have these sort of policies. They want cooperation. They want a better relationship. They want a secure and safe Middle East. How you can imagine that you would have some sort of leverage or you would win in the Middle East?
Well, we're not talking about leverage. We're just talking about Israeli has changed. I mean, this is the big shift that's being taken. This is imposed by assassination. decapitation strikes, missile strikes, assassinations. I mean, this is the imposition. I mean, the Abraham Accords, which were, as you described, originally about sort of, moving towards a more peaceful region, but by voluntary means, states, Morocco and others said, yes, I mean, we'll normalize with Israel. It's not like that now. The normalization is coming at the end of a missile strike. So, I mean, it's anyone who opposes Israel is in danger of assassination at the moment or military action. I mean, actually, you played that clip at the outset of this talk. And you had the ambassador saying, well, we'll go for them wherever they are. Doesn't matter. Across any borders, we'll go. So we're in a very new era. Limitless war. No legal elements. No old geopolitical constructs or thinking. It's just brute force to do it. Will that be viable? Is this viable? Well, there are two things to say about that, I think. I mean, I'm not trying to pretend I have this a sort of easy conclusion. But one was that Israel, Ben-Gurion, understood that Israel was a small state. It's 7 million people or so. But that it would never be able to have a big conscript army. And therefore, he introduced the idea of reserves, that there would be a small professional army. Mostly it would be reserves, and it would have to be short wars. He said that particularly. Has to be short wars, say 3 weeks or something, so the reservists could go home and pick up, the threads to their personal life and to their business life and things like this. So that was the first model for Israel. And it was understood that Israel couldn't cope with a wider war because of the strains on the reserve system and the structures. And so in that respect, Israel is now, I think, exceeding its limits, its boundaries. I mean, wars everywhere in the Middle East. I mean, there are about 5 countries that's attacked in the last week or so, from Yemen to all across the Middle East. So that is one element. But the other thing is, and there was a very powerful article written in Haaretz, the weekend edition recently, by someone who went back to 48. And the author originally done the work on the 48 period and how it worked out that these were the values of Israel that were implanted in 48, and it was supposed to be about the purity of arms, the support for any Israeli that was killed, or we get back the body, come what may, we go back and we fight for them. And then she compares that and says, of course, that wasn't what happened in 48. People were killed, children were shot, women were raped, and there was never any justice. It never came. There was a report written, but never published. And she said, even when it was clear that there were crimes committed against Palestinians, obvious ones, it was never treated. And what she was really saying is, look at us now. It's the same. Where are our values? What is Israel now? Just a killing machine? Is it the Haganah? Are we just the Haganah, a sort of terrorist movement in the future? Is that how we can survive? And I think these pressures are real, and I think they're growing. And I think and this was her conclusion. She said, the war that, brought about the state, but the conditions and what happened in that war may actually bring about the end of Israel itself. It's quite a profound, thought-provoking piece for Israelis to read and ponder, because of course we have that. I mean, the awful scenes in Gaza where soldiers, I mean, seemingly kill children for diversion, drop bombs on tents, burning people alive. Purity of arms, the moral army, the moral purpose of Israel, gone.
When it comes, Alastair, to the case of Ukraine, we had a new escalation yesterday. Russian drones on Polish territory, and they were somehow exaggerating what has happened. We haven't heard any sort of bombing, but they're trying to, it seems that Europe and European countries are trying to somehow exaggerate what has happened. And there was no context, there was no talk between the Russian president and the Polish president, or the people below them, the foreign ministers, and nothing of that sort. How?
Well, I can't vouch for this and say this is true. But I will tell you, first of all, that the Russians say they fired no drones into Poland. What the Russians are saying, and I'm not saying that this is an official position per se, but they're saying that they were Geran drones, the geranium drones that went into Poland. And they believe that actually these drones were intended to look like Russian drones. That in fact, they were put together using parts of Geran drones that had fallen in Ukraine, and that they had been, deliberately put as much of the sort of debris of Geran drones together with new elements to create drones to make it seem as when they fell and they were looked at and the experts pored over them and they say, well, look, these are clearly, there are Russian parts in this and that therefore it's a Russian missile. They think that there is a stream of thinking, therefore, which I can't say has been fully verified, but that this is a very blatant false flag affair happening just as the Russians were engaged in an operation against Lvov, just the other side of the Polish border, to give it more sort of credibility and more punch. That is the Russian story. Of course, the Ukrainians will have a different story and the Poles have a different one. But I think that, you look at this and you ask the question, cui bono? Why would, Russia want to fire drones? I mean, that didn't seem to do anything, but why do they want to do that? Other than to attract the attention. And of course, there are Russophobes in Poland, and the Prime Minister has suggested calling a NATO Article 4 meeting to discuss these things happening. But that's what I understand, that these were cleverly constructed using actual parts of fallen drone debris from the Geran drones, put together with other parts that were made to look like a Russian drone, and then fired into Poland precisely to trigger that sort of NATO reaction that the Polish Prime Minister Tusk seems to be advocating. We will see. But of course, it is, as always with these, the dangers of false flags. They sometimes work, sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Do you think that Russia and Russian government and Putin administration believes that they can get something through negotiations with the United States, or as they try to negotiate, or somehow pretend or somehow try to get whatever the maximum out of negotiations, the main objective would be achieved on the battlefield?
Well, I can't answer for what Putin thought after the meeting in Anchorage, because that's not something that's publicly available. But what I think was the sense of Russians more widely in the leadership, certainly, but not an official position. But the sense is that, at the end of the meeting, it seemed that Trump had listened and heard the Putin's case that they are going to proceed with the special military operation in order to force a solution by military means, force a solution on Zelensky and on the Europeans. And that they thought they had some sort of indications that Trump would push back on sanctions and other actions for a while anyway. But what they see and what I see, and I don't think it's very controversial, they don't see any signs of preparations for a lasting peace settlement, from no proper spade work, staff work. There are certain things, and Putin has made this point very clearly. I mean, as things stand, how would you have a final settlement when, Ukraine still operates under martial law? There would have to be a referendum on that. Referendums cannot be held under martial law. And if a martial law is ended, then an election for a new president has to come. These are all parts of the Ukrainian process. But you don't see any efforts, serious efforts by the United States to start sort of putting into process the elements for a political solution. We just hear the same thing, ceasefire and then security guarantees, and would NATO would be deployed, which of course Russia will not accept any form of NATO. And it's fairly obvious why. I mean, this whole conflict arose from NATO coming into Ukraine, the NATOization of Ukraine after 2014. And so, they're not going to say, yes, you can have NATO coming back in after all this expenditure of Russian blood to get to this point. So I don't think that is going to be a start. But nonetheless, we see at the end of that, Trump doesn't speak to Putin, but goes to the Europeans and has a meeting with the coalition of the willing, and he says to them, look, you really must sanction Russia. No, you've got to sanction all Russia. Secondary sanctions on India, secondary sanctions on China, 100% sanctions, so as to stop any of this. You've got to do the sanctioning, not America, is the message he's done. And of course, I think the Europeans were going to be in Washington today or yesterday or today. I haven't followed the news on that today, and going to have meetings one-to-one with Trump, not in the same format as before, to press on him the need for America to sanction Russia. Well, I think Russia actually at the meetings in the SCO largely managed to get arrangements and understandings with SCO colleagues that reduce Russia's remaining vulnerabilities against sanctions. So I don't think they're particularly worried about the sanctions, but they still don't know, what does Trump want? What is his next steps? One moment it's this way, then the next moment it's the other way. We don't know what he's going to say next. What is he going to do? And I think the general conclusion must be, for anyone who follows this closely, that the United States wants to keep a state of perpetual escalatory dominance, if not dominance, ladder. I mean, Russia has the dominance, but they want to keep a sort of escalatory ladder, propped up against the Ukraine as something that they can get back onto when they want to, or in the future, they may want to sort of go up that escalatory ladder. And they're reluctant to take away the ladder completely, because then they lose the chance of, deciding at a later date they might want to go up the escalatory ladder. I mean, if for nothing else, because of financial reasons, for the money, that the conflict in Ukraine has returned to the military-industrial complex, but also to many politicians. It's been a boondoggle, and just like Afghanistan was. So this is really, if there's no sign of progress, no tangible progress, what's the point of a meeting between Putin and Zelensky? I mean, they can sit together, but what are they going to say? I mean, nothing has been prepared on that. There really would have to, I mean, these are legal things, not just, demands, but, there really would have to be to agree territorial changes and things. There need to be a referendum of the Ukrainian people. And that means the end of martial law, and that means the end of Zelensky in power, and nothing moves, nothing happens. And so what does Trump want? I think at the moment, escalation. Where is all of this, when you look at, his endorsement of Israel's war on Gaza and his excess the other day made it plain that they're not stopping annexation of West Bank. They've got nothing to say. It's up to the Israelis. I mean, where is all this taking us? I think the original sort of idea of Trump using belligerency, threats of tariffs and sanctions and military action as a way of maintaining sort of Trump's dominance across the globe, in Europe and elsewhere, and in Venezuela, all of these things, doesn't seem to be working very well. So what's going to happen next is going to be a big question. Is he going to, I mean, so far, and there again, what's happened in Doha is critical. Are we going to see a move towards greater, if you like, greater sort of emphasis on military action described as peace, war masquerading as peace? And is that enough to soothe his mega base? Well, that's an unanswered question.
I think Europe, Alastair, is in a very dire situation with the case of tariffs that the United States wants to put on Russia, because after all, with the Nord Stream and the case of Russian oil that they're trying to put tariffs, sanctions, they're one of the most important importer of Russian oil, together with China, India, Turkey, European Union, and Brazil. And much of the oil they're receiving is coming from not only directly from Russia, but also from India and Turkey. And so what is the solution on their part? Is somehow,
it's worse. It's worse than what you've just described, because during at the end of this conference, the SCO conference, a contract was signed for Siberia 2 with China, which may be completed by 2030, in about less than 10 years' time. But the point of this really is to say that gas was coming from Alaska. And China is right over here. and the gas is up there in Alaska. And of course, it was always meant for Europe. That gas field was developed and was intended for Nord Stream and for Europe. But now that the contract has been signed, it's never coming back to Europe. The Europeans, Germany's whole business model, very dependent on the cheap pipeline gas coming from Russia and the Alaskan field. But it's committed now. It's going to China. So, I mean, not only the points you made about, the Europeans, are paying 7 times what they used to pay for energy, at least. Their business model required cheap energy. Soon they'll have nothing and nothing in prospect. And, they'll probably go along with it because they are so weak-kneed in the European Union. And they'll say anything, because if we do what he wants on sanctioning Russia, perhaps he'll be tougher in supporting Ukraine. That's how they think. They think, the trade agreement with America and everything. Oh, yes, von der Leyen says, well, yes, we could have been tougher in the negotiations, but really what we were hoping for was that, if he saw that we were serious in this respect and Europe was seriously supporting, then he would be tougher, if you like, in his support for Ukraine, i.e. providing weapons, money, and intelligence to Ukraine. Well, there's no sign that that's happened yet. There's no sign that it is happening yet. What he's saying instead is, well, no, Europe, you've got to pay for the weapons. You've got to buy them from America. Then you can send them to Ukraine. You've got to up your NATO contributions to 5%. So a tax on Europe of 5%, all of which will be spent on buying American weapons. And he's saying, now you can start sanctioning Russia. Where is Europe going to turn? It's already alienated China. It has completely alienated Russia. And for all their attempts at it, Trump despises Europe and the Europeans. He doesn't think very much of us at all. So Europe is in a real existential crisis.
Before wrapping up, Alastair, there is another case going on in Nepal, some sort of color revolution, which is related to both China and India. How do you see the way that, because it's doorstep for China and India, and we've seen the same sort of attitude in Pakistan and in Bangladesh with the color revolution, and the case of Imran Khan in Pakistan. How do you see the way that Russia and India, which they tried to put their differences aside at the SCO summit, they were trying to get closer. India was somehow, they're feeling that the United States is willing to sacrifice India because of the war in Ukraine. That's why they're getting closer to China. And how is this incident, this color revolution in Nepal would influence the relationship between the two?
Well, I'm not familiar with the details of who's who in Nepal and in this current crisis. But what you say is right. There's this whole policy of the West in respect to Russia and to China is called extending Russia. And that is, creating hotspots all around the periphery of Russia to take away money and resources and attention from the main issue, the Ukrainian issue, or whatever it is. And I think this is very likely, I think this is very likely another example, just as we've seen that happening in the Caucasus, where they're trying to extend Russia through the Caucasus and Azerbaijan, and extend Iran also in the same way. So I think, you know, to heat up the border between Russia and China is an obvious attempt to drive a wedge that had just been sort of satisfactorily overcome at Tianjin SCO meeting.
Thank you so much, Alastair, for being with us today. Great
My
pleasure as
pleasure.
always. Before wrapping up, our audience, please go to conflictsforum.substack.com and subscribe there. You're going to find a lot of stuff there about geopolitical issues. Great pleasure, Alastair, as always.
Thank you so much. Thank you.